He was just a missing college student. No charges, no crime. But Reddit named him as a terrorist. By the time the truth came out, it was too late. This is the story of how thousands of internet users, driven by good intentions, turned one young man's tragedy into a viral witch hunt. Chapter 1. A Nation in Shock. April 15th, 2013. It was supposed to be a day of celebration. The Boston Marathon is one of the oldest and most iconic races in the world. Every year, thousands of runners and spectators line the streets. Families cheer from sidewalks. Volunteers hand out water and medals. It's more than just a sporting event. It's a community tradition. But that year, something changed. Social media filled with shaky videos, blurry photos, and shocked reactions. Television networks broke into programming to report the unfolding tragedy. At 2:49 p.m., 2 homemade bombs exploded near the finish line on Boylston Street. They were placed just 200 yards apart and detonated within seconds of each other. The blasts tore through the crowd, killing 3 people and injuring over 260 more. The scenes were horrifying. Smoke filled the air. People screamed. Runners collapsed mid-stride. First responders rushed in. The FBI quickly took the lead on the investigation, calling it an act of terrorism. The public was urged to remain calm and to report any suspicious information, but details were scarce. Officials were careful not to jump to conclusions. The streets were littered with shattered glass, twisted metal, and blood. It didn't take long for news to spread. Within minutes, phones across the country lit up. Explosion at the Boston Marathon was trending everywhere, but one platform in particular became a hub for internet investigation. For most Americans, this was more than just a bombing. Some are silly, some are serious. In 2013, it was growing rapidly and known for its unique power to crowdsource information. It felt like an attack on something personal. A public, peaceful event turned into a war. The emotional impact was massive. People were scared, angry, confused, and perhaps more than anything, they wanted answers. Who would do this? People built timelines, matched angles, and tried to piece together what had happened. Others were driven by the thrill of being first, and some just wanted to feel useful in a time of fear and chaos. Why? And how had they slipped through? In the first 24 hours, law enforcement agencies kicked into high gear, and that silence, necessary as it was, created a dangerous space. When people are afraid and no one has answers, they start looking for their own. And in 2013, many of them turned to the internet. It didn't take long for amateur detectives to show up. Twitter threads began dissecting news footage. Facebook groups started comparing photos of backpacks. Reddit, for those unfamiliar, is a large online forum made up of thousands of smaller communities called No chain of command, no legal oversight, just a sea of opinions, guesses, and speculation, some careful, others reckless. That week, Reddit users created a new community called ARF. Its purpose was simple: use public photos and videos to identify the people behind the attack. Some truly believed they were doing the right thing. Others just wanted to be the one to crack the case. Thousands of people joined in. They weren't criminals. They weren't hackers. Most were just regular people. Students, tech workers, even parents, all wanting to help. Some genuinely believed they could find clues the FBI might have missed. It started with small efforts, analyzing shadows in photos, comparing timestamps, circling backpacks that looked suspicious. Reporters monitored subreddits, looking for leads. Some even began quoting Reddit users in live coverage. At first, it felt like organized chaos, but also strangely hopeful. Reddit had a history of solving things. They'd found stolen items, helped people identify strangers from photos, solved puzzles that took hours of teamwork. So why not this? The idea of thousands of minds coming together to help law enforcement felt inspiring, powerful, even, but there was one problem. Reddit wasn't law enforcement. There were no rules of evidence, and as the community grew, the line between helpful and harmful began to blur. While the FBI was analyzing forensic evidence, conducting interviews, and working behind closed doors, Reddit's investigation was happening in real time in public. People began posting names, sharing personal photos, creating elaborate theories. Some users begged others to slow down, to wait for official information, but not everyone listened. The hunt became a game. Upvotes rewarded the most dramatic posts. Commenters pushed each other further. It's easy, in hindsight, To say this was irresponsible. But in that moment, it felt different. It felt like a crowd with good intentions, all pulling in the same direction. And it wasn't just Reddit. News sites began to pick up on online theories. Suddenly, the boundary between speculation and journalism started to vanish. And all of this, the energy, the hope, the chaos, was leading somewhere. It was leading to a name, a face, someone the internet would decide looked like a suspect. And once that happened, there was no going back. At this point in the story, it's important to pause, not because the momentum stops, but because the consequences begin. What started as a community effort to help quickly evolved into something far more dangerous. An unregulated manhunt led by people with no training, no responsibility, and no accountability. In the next chapter, we'll look at exactly how that happened, and how one name, one innocent young man, was pulled into the storm, not because of evidence, not because of guilt, but because he looked familiar, and because the internet was watching. Chapter 2. Reddit's moment to shine. When the FBI released surveillance images of two suspects on April 18, 2013, everything changed. The photos showed two men walking through the crowd near the finish line. One wore a black cap, the other wore a white one. They looked calm, focused, both carried backpacks. They simply asked the public to help identify them. The FBI called them Suspect 1 and Suspect 2. But they didn't reveal names. That was all Reddit needed. Dozens of photo threads were live. Maps had been made. Users were tracking every second of footage they could find. Back in the Fine Boss, users compared the suspects to hundreds of people seen in crowd pictures. Photos were zoomed in. Faces were circled. Lists were made. Sharing. Discovery. Thousands of people from around the world working together to one goal: to find the suspects and help stop another possible attack. Some even used facial recognition tools to match identities, even though most of them had no background in forensics. Now, with the FBI photos released, the subreddit went into overdrive. Posts exploded, found people's lost pets, even helped identify random photos taken years before. Too many. This felt like Reddit's moment. This was what the platform was built for: open collaboration. There was real energy in the threads, a sense of urgency, and strangely, pride. Comments flooded in like, "We can solve this before the FBI." The suspects were armed and dangerous, and this time, mistakes would have real-world consequences. The internet always wins. They tracked people through Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram. Some of those people weren't even in Boston the day of the bombing. Let's be the good guys this time. It wasn't entirely misguided. In past cases, Reddit had helped solve small mysteries. It had helped track down stolen goods. But this was different. This wasn't a missing laptop. This was terrorism. Lives were lost. People were traumatized. Still, that didn't slow the community down. A few weeks before the bombing, he left his apartment without telling anyone and never came back. They shared smiling photos, personal memories, and messages of love. If someone had a black bag and looked vaguely like one of the FBI photos, they were immediately put under scrutiny. People started picking prime suspects based on backpacks, clothing, or even posture. The comparison was weak, but the resemblance, according to some users, was close enough. That one comment sparked a thread. In some cases, users posted full names, social media accounts, and hometowns. But once a name was posted, even without evidence, it was nearly impossible to take back. Other users would copy the name, screenshot it, share it on Twitter or Facebook. It spread like wildfire. Even though the subreddit moderators tried to set rules, like "Don't post personal information" or "Do not accuse anyone without solid proof," the threads moved too fast. The truth was buried under thousands of guesses, suspicions, and emotions. Others commented hateful things. The page, once filled with hope, became a battleground of accusations and fear. And in that wave of confusion came the first real tragedy of the hunt. His name was Sunil. He was a 22-year-old student at Brown University. Quiet, smart, kind. He had been struggling with depression. His family, devastated, had started a Facebook page asking for help finding him. For days, they heard nothing until Reddit found him. One Reddit user thought Sunil looked similar to Suspect 2 in the FBI photos. Then, another user linked to Sunil's missing persons page. Another found his Facebook. Within hours, people were calling him the bomber. They weren't just guessing anymore. They were certain. Some users began messaging his family through the Facebook page. The Tripathi family, who had been quietly searching for their missing son, was suddenly at the center of a viral conspiracy theory. And it didn't stop there. Popular Twitter accounts picked up the name. So did some journalists. One BuzzFeed reporter even tweeted, "Reddit may have just solved the bombing." People weren't trying to cause harm. Most wanted to help. By then, it was everywhere. But Sunil hadn't been involved in the bombing. He hadn't been seen in weeks, and no one had stopped to ask who the real bombers were, and how the Tripathi family, already mourning the loss of their son, had to face something no one deserves. What if we're wrong? Back on Reddit, the thread kept growing. Some users raised concerns. This doesn't feel right. We need more proof. What if we're ruining someone's life? But those voices were drowned out by louder ones. Reddit was caught in the rush. The desire to be first, to be helpful, to be part of something important. It blinded people to caution. By the time some users realized the damage being done, it was too late. The theory had already left Reddit and become a headline. And Sunil's name, an innocent man who had never hurt anyone, was now being associated with a terrorist act he had nothing to do with. This chapter in the story highlights something deeply human, the need to understand, to act, and to make sense of chaos. But the road to harm is often paved with good intentions, and when there are no checks, no accountability, and no pause for reflection, even a well-meaning community can cause real pain. This was Reddit's moment, but instead of becoming a story of success, it became a warning. In the next chapter, we'll talk about what happened when the truth finally came out, because while the internet was solving one mystery, it was destroying another family's hope. Chapter 3. The name that shouldn't have spread. Sunil Tripathi's name wasn't just whispered in dark Reddit threads anymore. It was everywhere. On Twitter, on Facebook, in newsrooms, and in the minds of thousands who were desperately trying to understand who could do something as horrifying as the Boston Marathon bombing. It didn't matter that there was no evidence. It didn't matter that Sunil had been missing for nearly a month before the bombs ever went off. What mattered, in that moment, was that the internet had made up its mind, and that's how lives get ruined. Let's step back for a second. Sunil was a philosophy student at Brown University. Quiet, thoughtful, loved by his family and friends, but like many college students, he was struggling. Depression had taken hold, and in March 2013, he left his apartment one night without a phone or ID. He simply vanished. His family was terrified. They did everything right, contacted police, started a Facebook page, reached out to local news. They hoped someone, somewhere, had seen him. Weeks passed, no leads, no updates, just silence, until Reddit found him. The comparison started innocently. As a single comment under a photo, a Reddit user thought Sunil resembled the FBI suspect too. The man in the white hat seen walking near the bomb site. The resemblance was vague at best, but that didn't stop the internet. Within hours, his missing persons photo was being shared alongside images of the bomber. Side-by-side comparisons popped up. Threads labeled him likely suspect. Users dug into his social media, his school, his family. It escalated fast. A third posted the missing persons flyer again, this time with bolded text. Found. One person speculated. Another agreed. It felt like confirmation, but it wasn't. Shared a no-deleted tweet hinting that Reddit had possibly identified the bomber. It was just digital momentum. Outside of Reddit, the theory was gaining traction, and suddenly, out of nowhere, the media is calling to ask if your son is a terrorist. On Twitter, his name began trending. Journalists picked up on the chatter. Some asked questions. Others repeated what they saw without checking. BuzzFeed, a major digital outlet, other reporters started calling the Tripathi family. Imagine that for a second. Your child has been missing for weeks. You're desperate, scared, clinging to hope. That's the moment the Tripathi family found themselves in. The Facebook page they'd been using to share updates, once filled with support and kindness, was now flooded with hateful comments, accusations, threats. They didn't understand what was happening. They had no idea a Reddit thread had named their missing son as a suspect in one of the worst terrorist attacks on American soil, and they couldn't stop it. On Reddit, some users began to feel uncomfortable. A few spoke up. In the eyes of many online, he was the bomber. This isn't confirmed. This could be really dangerous. Guys, this is someone's real life. But by then, The damage had been done. Sunil's name had already been woven into the narrative. There was no pause, no waiting for officials. And that's the danger of a digital manhunt. It moves faster than truth. Later that night, around 10 p.m., authorities officially named the suspects. They were brothers, Tamerlan and Johar. No undo. And now, the whole world had seen their son's face, linked to something he had nothing to do with. Both had lived in the US for years. Both had roots in Chechnya. Neither had any connection to Sunil Tripathi. However, his death was ruled as suicide. The younger brother, Johar, was the man in the white hat, the same one Reddit thought resembled Sunil. We don't know if he ever saw the rumors. And just like that, the theory collapsed. The subreddit deleted posts. Moderators apologized. Tweets were deleted. Some journalists issued quiet corrections. But for Sunil and his family, there was no delete button. They had already lived through a nightmare. The aftermath wasn't loud. It was quiet. A few weeks later, on April 23, 2013, Sunil's body was found in a river near Providence, Rhode Island. His family issued a brief statement. They asked for privacy, and they thanked those who had supported them through their search. They never directly blamed Reddit, but everyone knew. The timing, the pressure, the unbearable noise. There's no way to measure what role the false accusation played in those final weeks. We don't know exactly when Sunil died, but we know his family did, and they never should have had to. After the truth came out, Reddit posted a formal apology. One line read, "We want to extend our deepest apologies to the family of Sunil." Some users expressed guilt. Others tried to explain their actions, but an explanation is not a solution. What happened to Sunil was a failure, not just of Reddit, but of online culture. Of all of us. The rush to solve, the need to be right, the desire to be first. All of it collided with a real person's life. And it wasn't just a mistake. It was a warning. Because the next time something terrible happens, the same patterns will emerge. The threads, the guesses, the theories. And if we're not careful, someone else's name will spread. Someone else's family will receive those messages. Someone else will pay the price for the internet's need for answers. This chapter is not about pointing fingers. It's about asking better questions. What do we owe each other in moments of crisis? Where is the line between curiosity and harm? And how do we stop a digital crowd before it turns into a mob? The story of Sunil Tripathi is tragic, but it's also important. It shows us that even in a world of algorithms and avatars, real lives hang in the balance. And when we forget that, the consequences aren't virtual, they're permanent. Chapter 4. The real suspects and the fallout. The truth always comes, sometimes slowly, sometimes all at once. In the case of the Boston Marathon bombing, it arrived in the early hours of April 19, 2013, and it came with violence, fear, and clarity. The suspects were not hidden anymore. They had names, they had faces, and they had nothing to do with Sunil. The two men responsible for the bombings were Tamerlan Sarnav, 26, and Johar Sarnav, 19, brothers, originally from Chechnya who had lived in the US for years. Their photos matched the ones the FBI had released days earlier. Suspect 1 and Suspect 2. Johar was the one in the white hat, the same person some Reddit users had wrongly connected to But once the Sarnav brothers were identified, there was no more room for speculation. This wasn't a Reddit theory anymore. It was a confirmed manhunt, led by professionals. A gunfight broke out. Tamerlan was killed. The timeline was fast and terrifying. On the night of April 18th, the brothers shot and killed a campus police officer at MIT. They carjacked a vehicle. Then they led police on a chase through the streets of Watertown, Mass. During the chase, they threw explosives out the window. Johar escaped briefly, before being found the next day, hiding inside a boat in someone's backyard. He was captured alive. And just like that, it was over. The bombers had been caught. The danger was gone. And so was any excuse for continuing the false stories floating around the internet. But the truth didn't erase what had already happened. Sunil's name still lingered in comments, in old tweets, in cached pages. For Sunil Tripathi and his family, the damage was irreversible. Even after the Sarnav brothers were confirmed as the real suspects, the internet doesn't forget, and neither does a family that's been through weeks of heartbreak, only to be pulled into the center of one of the most high-profile cases in modern American history. When Sunil's body was found on April 23rd, just days after the real suspects were named, many assumed the timeline explained everything, but the truth was more complex. The medical examiner's report suggested Sunil had taken his own life shortly after his disappearance, weeks before the bombing ever happened. That meant he had likely died before Reddit ever mentioned his name. In one sense, that fact came as a relief, but in another, it made everything worse. The idea that Sunil, a young man quietly struggling with mental health, had his memory tarnished after death is a weight that still hangs heavy over this story. He never got to defend himself. He never got to correct the record. His family had to do it for him, and they had to do it while mourning his loss. After the FBI confirmed the Tsarnaev brothers as the bombers, Reddit moderators issued a public apology. They admitted the community had gotten it wrong, badly wrong. They said they would do better. Other platforms did the same. Journalists who had echoed the rumor began walking it back. Some deleted tweets. Others added disclaimers to articles. But for many watching, the apology felt hollow. There had been no system in place to stop the spread of bad information in the first place. There were no safeguards, no moderators fast enough, no warnings loud enough to slow the momentum once it started. The system wasn't just broken, it was never built to handle something like this. This moment, the fallout, became a turning point in the way we talk about digital crowdsourcing. Reddit's failed manhunt was no longer just a mistake. It was now a case study. Universities, media scholars, and ethicists began using it as an example of what can go wrong when information spreads unchecked online. It became the subject of TED Talks, op-eds, even documentaries. People started asking difficult but necessary questions. Should online communities be allowed to investigate real-world crimes? Subreddits dealing with sensitive topics were more closely monitored. Mods were encouraged to remove speculation about suspects unless confirmed by official sources. Do platforms have a responsibility to intervene when things go too far? And what happens when the people being accused have no voice to fight back? The Sunil Tripathi case didn't just end with a misidentification. Who felt helpless watching the news? Who believed they could be part of the solution? It triggered a deep examination of how we as a digital society handle truth, responsibility, and restraint. But the changes, if any, came slowly. Reddit made some updates to its rules. Still, the core issue remained. The internet moves faster than moderation. He was found guilty on all counts, including using a weapon of mass destruction. He was sentenced to death, and people are often quicker to share than to verify. The Reddit community wasn't full of bad actors. It was full of people who wanted to help, but good intentions don't cancel out harm, especially when the cost is someone's life or their legacy. In the years that followed, Johar Sarnav was put on trial. Instead, they spoke quietly, with dignity, about mental health, about compassion, and about the dangers of jumping to conclusions. That part of the story, the legal part, ended in the courtroom. Why are so many people drawn to these online hunts? And where should the line be between public involvement and professional investigation? But Sunil's story never made it that far, because his wasn't a criminal case. It was a story about being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Not physically, but digitally. He wasn't part of the bombing, but the bombing became part of his name. His family chose not to pursue legal action against Reddit or the media. They asked people to learn from what happened, to think before they share, to remember that behind every headline, every photo, every name is a human being. In the next chapter, we'll look closer at what this event revealed about the nature of internet investigations. Because the case of Sunil Tripathi didn't start with bad people. It started with a tragedy. Then the crowd came. Then the story changed. Chapter 5. When the crowd gets it wrong, what happens when thousands of people come together to solve a mystery, and they get it completely wrong? That's the uncomfortable question at the heart of this story. Because the Boston Marathon Reddit investigation wasn't an isolated event. It was a moment that showed the world just how powerful and dangerous the internet crowd can be. And even though the case of Sunil Tripathi was tragic, it wasn't the first, and it certainly wasn't the last. Let's be clear, crowdsourcing isn't always a bad thing. In many situations, it's help. Platforms like Reddit and Twitter have been used to share local alerts, surface new leads, and pressure authorities when no one was listening. There have been cases where internet users have helped identify missing persons, reunite lost items, or catch small-time criminals. People like to help. They want to feel useful, especially when faced with something painful or unjust. But the line between helping and harming is thinner than most realize. It wasn't a group of people setting out to ruin someone's life. It was mostly regular users, students, tech workers, board professionals, who genuinely believed they were doing something good. And when you cross it, the results can be devastating. In the case of Sunil Tripathi, the crowd wasn't filled with trolls. That's what makes this story so unsettling, because the danger didn't come from bad actors. It came from well-meaning people moving too fast. Here's how that happens. First, there's a major event, something shocking, tragic, confusing, like the Boston Marathon bombing. All you need is an internet connection and a few guesses that feel convincing. They want someone to blame. Next comes the information vacuum. That period when officials haven't released many details. People are scared. They want answers. On YouTube, the most dramatic thumbnails get the most clicks. They start digging, posting, commenting. They share. They believe. That's when the internet steps in. Photos get analyzed. Names get floated. Theories get posted. And suddenly, you don't need training or experience or context to play detective. Once someone posts a name, the snowball begins. The internet rewards speed, not accuracy. On Reddit, posts with bold claims rise to the top. On Twitter, the most sensational theories get retweeted. And once something feels like a lead, people want to be part of it. And worse, they stop questioning. At a certain point, doubt becomes unpopular. No one wants to be the one saying, "Slow down, that's not exciting." It doesn't go viral, so caution disappears. No accountability, no training, and that's how a guess becomes a headline. In the days after Sunil was wrongly identified, some Reddit users expressed regret. They admitted they didn't know what they were doing, that they should have waited, that they never imagined it would go that far. But that's the thing. The internet doesn't need bad intentions to do bad things. It just needs momentum. And that's what's so dangerous about the online detective culture. The idea that anyone, anywhere, can and should take justice into their own hands. There are no rules, but there are real consequences. This wasn't the only time a crowd got it wrong. We've seen similar mistakes in other high-profile cases. In the aftermath of school shootings, online forums have falsely identified students as gunmen. After protests, people have wrongly named peaceful marchers as violent agitators. In missing persons cases, innocent ex-boyfriends or co-workers have been harassed because someone on TikTok got a feeling. The result is always the same. Someone suffers because strangers believed a theory over facts. Anyone can act like a detective, without any of the training, the limits, or the oversight. And no matter how fast corrections come, it's too late. The damage is already done. It cracked down on witch hunts, banning users from doxing or accusing people without official sources. Mods were trained to remove speculation faster. Communities got stricter. So where do we draw the line? Should online communities be banned from discussing true crime or active investigations? Probably not, but there needs to be a conversation about responsibility. Because today, anyone can publish a theory, anyone can spread a name, and when a crowd is wrong, there's rarely accountability. No one gets sued, no one gets arrested, no one loses their platform. Meanwhile, the people who get caught in the middle, like Sunil and his family, live with the fallout forever. Share verified information. Be clear about what's fact and what's not. Reddit, to its credit, learned something from this. In the years after the bombing, the site changed some of its rules, but the culture of internet sleuthing didn't go away. And behind every Reddit thread is a ripple effect that could last years. If anything, it's only gotten bigger. With platforms like TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and Discord, these online investigations now spread faster than ever. And the temptation is still there, to solve, to expose, to be part of something huge. So the question becomes, what do we do next time? Because there will be a next time. The lesson isn't, don't help. The lesson is, help responsibly. Not as a suspect, not as a case study, but as a reminder. If you want to raise awareness about a missing person, use official sources. If you want to join a community investigating something suspicious, ask, do we have proof? Is this safe? Could this hurt someone? And if you're not sure, maybe just wait. Because behind every blurry photo is a real person. Behind every theory is someone's family. The crowd got it wrong with Sunil, but the internet has the power to get things right. If we slow down, if we stay humble, if we remember that being first doesn't mean being right. In the next chapter, we bring this story to a close. and reflect on the legacy Sunil Tripathi leaves behind, of what can happen when we forget the human cost of being wrong online. Chapter 6. What we should remember. Sunil Tripathi was never the bomber. He wasn't a terrorist. He wasn't a suspect. He was a college student, a son, a brother, a friend. He was someone trying to find peace in the middle of a mental health battle, someone who went missing quietly, without a trace, weeks before the world changed. But when tragedy hit Boston, and the internet wanted answers fast, his name was dragged into a storm he never saw coming. Even in death, he couldn't defend himself. So now, it's our turn to remember the truth, and to ask what we're really supposed to learn from all of this. When the story of Sunil and Reddit first broke, it seemed like just another internet mistake, a bad call, an unfortunate mix. But with time, people began to realize something deeper. This wasn't just a case of a rumor gone wrong. It was a warning. We don't just watch events unfold anymore. We participate. We analyze. We investigate. We insert ourselves. It was a moment that exposed how fragile the line is between seeking justice and causing harm, between curiosity and chaos, because the internet has changed the way we experience tragedy. And sometimes, we Sunil's story didn't go viral in the traditional way. There was no hashtag campaign to clear his name. No massive apology tour. No trending moment that made everything right again. Instead, it slowly faded, the way most real pain does. But for his family, the damage lingered. They had to live with the knowledge that strangers, most of them well-meaning, had turned his disappearance into a public spectacle. They didn't just lose a son, they had to fight to protect his memory. They had to explain that he wasn't who people said he was, and they did it all with grace. In interviews afterward, Sunil's sister spoke about how overwhelming the experience had been. She talked about the pain of seeing hateful messages flood their Facebook page. She talked about how quickly a stranger's theory can become a public sentence. And she talked about forgiveness. Not because what happened was okay, but because holding on to hate wouldn't help anyone heal. That's the kind of strength that's hard to put into words. Not because the crowd is stupid, but because the stakes are too high. When lives, reputations, and families are on the line, we need more than guesses. We need caution, but it deserves to be remembered. So, what should we take away from all of this? They can shape the way people think, the way media reports, the way families grieve. Even one wrong post can set off a chain reaction that's impossible to stop. But just because we can post something doesn't mean we should. Every theory, every screenshot, every wild guess, it has a weight, a consequence. And once it's out there, we don't get to control where it lands. Let's start with the basics. 1. Not everything needs to be solved by the public. Some investigations are best left to professionals. 2. Speculation is not harmless. A comment, a post, a name. They feel small, but they can spread fast. 3. The truth matters, but so does how we search for it. We live in a time where speed often beats accuracy, but there's also something hopeful here, because stories like this, as painful as they are, give us a chance to reset. They remind us that behind every username is a real person, behind every photo is a life, and behind every story is a family just trying to hold on. Sunil Tripathi should never have been part of the Boston bombing conversation. Use it to remind others that what we post, what we speculate, and what we believe matters. His name didn't belong there. If it made you reflect, pause, or rethink how we act online, then that's the best way to honor Sunil. But now that it's been put there, wrongly, publicly, and permanently, we owe it to him to say what's true. Leave a comment with your thoughts, or share this video with someone who needs to hear it. He wasn't the bomber. He was a human being, and he was failed by a system that values speed over care, clicks over consequences, and internet justice over real justice. To everyone watching this, if this story made you feel something, talk about this case, share it. And if you ever find yourself in a Reddit thread, or a TikTok comment section, or a group chat where someone is naming names and pointing fingers without proof, you now have the power to say, stop, we've seen what happens. Maybe we can't change what happened to Sunil, but we can make sure it doesn't happen again. We can slow down, we can be kind, and we can choose truth, even when it takes a little longer to find. Thank you for watching. If you believe stories like this need to be told carefully, truthfully, and with respect, consider subscribing to this channel. We're not here to chase drama. We're here to remember what happens when we forget that people matter. Let's not forget again.